Today we are going to talk about something that is pretty serious, but not Sirius Black. And I'm sorry for that accidental pun. No, I am talking right now of the word Mudblood. So as you can see by the title, today's video will be an exploration of the word Mudblood and an attempt to explain why this word can be so utterly and totally offensive. Okay, so the chapter of course that I'm talking about is the chapter Mudblood and Murmurs, and in it we see how wonderfully jerkish Draco Malfoy can be, and it is beautiful and terrible to watch, because of course we have him buy his way onto the Quidditch team through Daddy's money and buying new brooms. We have him bragging about the fact that he was able to do this, and the brooms, and the fact that he's now Slytherin Seeker. And then of course, when Hermione is willing to give as good as she takes, we find out Draco cannot in fact do that. He does not like having to take anything. So we have him use this wonderful word Mudblood, and we find out it's so offensive that purebreds, Slytherins, know they have to protect Draco. We actually have Fred and George take a flying leap at the dude, and of course we have Ron attempt to curse him and have it backfire because of his broken wand. But of course it becomes a question for us of why it's that offensive. None of us like being called names. That's something we all sort of recognize. No one likes being put down, and obviously, just probably in the tone that Draco is using, it's going to be pretty obvious to Hermione that it was an insult. And Hermione doesn't actually know what's going on. Here's where the book differs from the movies. In the movies, she's the one that says it's a really offensive word, when Harry's just like, what just happened? In the books, Hermione doesn't know what's going on. They take Ron, who's vomiting slugs, up to Hagrid's, and Hagrid and Ron actually explain both to Harry and Hermione what is going on. So while we know it's an insult, it's got to be a pretty extreme one for us to actually get such a violent response from the other people there. So let's take a look at what we're actually told about this word. So we're going to take a look at what Ron actually says about this word and try and figure out if that's going to clarify anything for how offensive the word Mudblood actually is. Okay, so in my edition I'm on 89, but the chapters aren't really long, so you should be able to find it without too much trouble. It's about the most insulting thing he could think of. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who was Muggle-born, non-magic parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who think they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pureblood. Then we'll skip a bit down. It's a disgusting thing to call someone dirty blood, see? Common blood. It's mad. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyways. If we hadn't married Muggles, we'd have died out. Okay. So, from this we can in fact clarify a few things. First, just who this term is actually being used for. It's an extreme insult for wizards who are born, or witches, sorry, I recognize both words are used, who are born magical but from non-magical parents, so Muggle-born. So it does not seem to apply to half-bloods. Ron brings up half-blood saying most witches and wizards are half-blood anyways. but in some ways that part is slightly questionable, because it comes down to this idea, well, two ideas really. The idea that pure blood is better, and the idea, of course, that a half-blood is going to have a Muggle connection. And I think the definition of half-blood is within 2 generations, but it might be longer. Because Harry's considered a half-blood even though both his mother and his father were magical, because he has Muggle grandparents on his mother's side. So Harry's actually considered a half-blood. And if we continue on to what the rest of Ron is saying about dirty blood, in theory, as you got towards the more extreme end of prejudice, this word mudblood could be applied to half-bloods because they'd still have some dirty blood within them somewhere. But right now, we're just purely getting it applied to Muggleborns. Right now, in a peacetime in Harry's world, we are just getting this offensive term applied to sort of the smallest minority group that it could be applied to. But if it ever came down to it, that group could be expanded very quickly. And in fact, when we have the first writing on the wall appear, Draco points this out, that the Mudbloods go first, and then the Blood Traders. So we've got this small group with this word attached to them, but that word in its connotations could travel if it needs to travel, which is sort of a really terrifying thought, especially considering it's an insult. It's not a positive word. So the fact that we have its ability to travel is a serious concern. We also have then Ron pointing out to sort of the root of why this becomes an insult in his second comment, which is talking about dirty blood. Basically, Draco calling Hermione a mudblood is removing the magical part from her. It's saying, like, it's looking at her parentage and saying that is all that matters. No, you're not magical. You've got this dirty blood. And what that actually comes from is this word right here, which is metonymy. And it's originally, of course, from the Latin, and it is a figure of speech which considers in substituting for the name of a thing the name of an attribute of it, the thing, or something closely related to the thing. What does that matter here? Well, what's actually happening here is Hermione's entire being, instead of being Hermione, with all its attributes and all its faults and all her abilities and faults and positives and negatives, she becomes purely and only her blood. What Draco is actually saying here is that her Muggle parentage precludes any magical ability Hermione has. She becomes from a full-fledged person to nothing but this one flaw in Draco's mind. And that's the utterly terrifying part of it. In fact, mudblood itself as a term, in a lot of ways, actually compounds that insult. The same way the word itself is a compound word, mud and blood, you're actually then compounding the insult you're presenting to the person you're calling this. Because not only is Hermione purely her blood, but her blood is then dirty. Because in a lot of ways, and you'll see this with even our heroes, because they fall onto it, you'll find them using pureblood as almost an insult as well. And Ron gets pretty close to it here when he calls Neville as a pureblood. And then again, just like we have Mudblood compounding an insult, Ron also does it because he then judges first Neville on his blood status and then second on his magical ability. And while Ron's using those as two separate insults, they're basically the same two insults that Draco's using in the one word. So our heroes are not completely innocent from these judgments either. There just doesn't seem to be one term societally that says you are nothing but your blood and your blood is dirty for the other side of the society as it does for the Muggle-borns. So we've actually got a really insulting word. And we do it ourselves. Like, metonymy is not just something that's popping up in stories. In fact, if you look at our own selection of Western insults, it is working in the exact same way as Mudblood is. Calling somebody a witch with a B, that's calling someone a female dog. That is saying you are not a person, you are a dog. And not in a positive way. Because usually that word is used for a female dog who can be bred. Yeah, so you're taking away their humanity, and you're also, in a lot of ways, either sexualizing them or reviling them for that sexual nature. And we'll find this with a lot of our insults. Bastard is judging somebody on their less than perfect parentage, which they have no control over whatsoever. And even if you apply it as an insult and not as a term that implies that it's an illegitimate child, you're still making that connection. And again, that connection originates in the sexual nature and illicit sexual nature of this illegitimate child. Sexual. The C word. You were taking a person and bringing them down to only a single part of a person, and that part is either a sexualized part or it is reviled for its sexual nature. Every insult you have for a person takes them from being a person to something else that is less than a person. So when Draco throws out this word Mudblood, he is actually bringing to light for us how quickly we are willing to just demote somebody in order to make ourselves feel like a full person. Because that's what it really becomes for somebody like Draco, is this need to say, no, I'm good. Because Hermione, of course, before this word comes out, Hermione says that everyone on the Gryffindor team got on pure talent. And suddenly Draco doesn't feel like a full person. He's suddenly in doubt. So what he has to do is tear Hermione down from her position of personhood to just her blood and just her Muggle parentage. And he has to just rip her down from that and say, no, this is all you're worth and I am so much further above you. If we actually look at the insults we use, we ourselves do this every day. And sure, you might jokingly insult your friends, but you also have to admit, even if it's just in your head, you have to admit that there are points in time where you look at a person and you think of them less as a person and more as a part or something different than a person, a beast. And with that said, I'm now going to pull this up. This is, of course, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. And if we actually look at the introduction that Newt wrote to go along with this, we get into this question of what is a beast. And we try, he has several examples in which the wizarding community attempts to differentiate between a being and a beast. And we see how complicated this can be. So originally we had 2 legs, and that went horribly wrong, and then originally we had a human speech, and that went horribly wrong. And now we get to 1811, when a acceptable definition of being and beast was found. Grogan Stump, the newly appointed Minister for Magic, decreed that a being was any creature that has sufficient intelligence to understand the laws of the magical community and to bear part of the responsibility in shaping those laws. So we then get to this idea that a being or a person is somebody with reason, who can understand what is expected of them in society and obey those or choose to break them, and also help to further this society. But then we get a problem here, because Newt continues, naturally the matter has not rested there. We are all familiar with the extremists who campaign for the classification of Muggles as beasts. So we then get this word Mudblood, which is actually connected then, not only within its word in an attempt to bring a person from personhood down to something lesser, but we actually get it connected to a legitimate movement that are trying to do this. We have people in this world who are attempting to have Muggles classified not as beings with reason, but as beasts. Beasts who cannot understand the laws of the magical community and bear part of the responsibility in shaping those laws. If something like this passed purely for the Muggles, then the Muggle-borns are suddenly going to become in question. Because the moment you say, oh, that person doesn't have reason enough to understand us, they are not a person anymore to us. And we get into a whole lot of issues that our own world has gone through, is going through, and unfortunately is likely to continue to go through, in which a group of people will look at somebody else, some other group of people, and say they are not like us, so they can't be people. And that becomes a terrifying thought that Rowling is pointing to with the word Mudblood. It's happening in Harry's world, it is happening in ours. As long as we're aware of that, we can actually start working against that. Meaning, we can help stop our own societies and our own groups from dehumanizing other groups, even through these small things like insults or saying it's us versus them. Like, Draco is not aware of this dehumanizing quality right now. He's simply aware that this is an insult and he is angry. And that's because he's a child. But through the rest of the series, we're going to see Draco become aware of what this term actually means. And I think in a lot of ways we're also going to watch him start just regretting the fact that he has chosen this path of dehumanizing others to make himself feel more human. because that's going to run into some problems. Right now, though, he's just a kid, and Mudblood doesn't mean anything to him. But we have to be aware that it does, in fact, mean something. Okay, a little bit of the serious stuff aside, there are just a few other things that I'd like to point out through the end of this chapter. Really two. The first one being, of course, the other part of the chapter's title being murmurs. Because this is the first point that we have Harry hearing this weird voice that nobody else can hear. Like, Gilderoy can't hear it, and Ron says if it's something invisible, it would have had to open the door. And that didn't happen. So we have to have sort of this question of Harry just wondering if he's going insane. That he's now hearing voices. But those murmurs are going to keep showing up, so I haven't focused on them in this chapter, because we'll discuss them in later videos. The other one is this really interesting point with Ron in the awards cabinet, because of course for his detention he's with Filch and he has to clean all of these awards. And what the end of the chapter actually says is Ron's complaining that his muscles have all seized up. 14 times he made me buff up that Quidditch cup before he was satisfied, and then I had another slug attack all over a special award for services to the school. That's Tom Riddle's special award. His service to the school is supposedly finding the person that opened the Chamber of Secrets. Like, it's just a throwaway line, but there it is. And that's just awesome. Okay, so it's now into November here and the weather's starting to turn, but really, when the weather's not nice, one of the best things to curl up with is a really good book. So I'm going to keep reading, and I hope you guys do too. Have a good one.